Just because there's always that, you forget.
Yes, there's that possibility. And now we know how to clean it, so
Yep.
we can not have our recording on YouTube with our chatter at the beginning.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, you slice the beginning and you slice the end.
Exactly. All right, well, I show it is now 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started.
Yay.
All right. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar presented by WireNet member Simplex IT. This is a 6-part series designed to demystify key IT issues that business leaders face. For those of you unfamiliar with WireNet, Bob, if you could advance the slide. There we go.
I did good.
We have been busy quietly working to keep local manufacturers around. We responsively help with individual company needs like getting permits, graffiti removal, advocating for road repairs, help identifying financing sources, and recruitment of new talent like accountants, machinists, and plant managers. We offer programs like today's webinar to proactively help manufacturers thrive. Like many nonprofits, companies join WireNet to support our mission. One of those members is Simplex IT. For those of you who don't know Bob, he's one of those geeks who speaks English. He can help implement technology solutions that don't get in the way of your daily business. With that, I'll turn it over to Bob to discuss today's topic, policy and procedures, everything from departing employees to equipment use and disposal. Bob?
Yay. Cool. Thank you. Okay, a couple pieces, parts, overview. If you do have any questions or comments, we've muted the microphones, but the chat window and chat stuff is absolutely available. So feel free. I've heard me speak before. It's not all that big a deal, but I'm much more interested in what you guys have to ask as far as questions and all that kind of fun silliness. So we're going to talk about policy and procedures, but we're really specifically talking about it from an IT, information technology, or cyber standpoint. And I want to stress that we're not HR people, but we're going to be talking about it more from a what are the best things to include. We've only got 28 minutes left, so this is going to be a really high altitude overview. And hopefully it'll be useful. Who are we? Simplex IT. We've been around for about 10 years. We're a managed service provider. These are all the companies and awards that we've won recently, yada, yada, yada. Here are some of the services, the traditional managed service, also our co-managed IT services for those of you who have some level of IT involved. We also just introduced Simplex TM, which is really online and customized training. We highlight that, all that. Don't want to turn this into an advertisement. My book is finally out. It's CEO Survival Guide to Information Technology. It is not if you're looking to become a geek, but if you're trying to understand what part of geekness you need to know for your organization. Yada, yada, yada. Next session, as Ann was talking about, we love doing these. We really do. So this is our second and sixth. March 14th is really going to be talking about cybersecurity, and really we're going to be talking about the strategy of cybersecurity overall. It is no longer a simple product, but there's all sorts of pieces and parts which are products, processes, training, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's our next. In addition to that, we also have a bunch of other stuff that we have going on, and all of these, from our standpoint, are free and open to the public. So all these events are going. We just had one yesterday that was an introduction to cyber insurance. So now, here's our caveats. And I say there are 2 caveats and then list 4, which gives you an idea how good I am at PowerPoint. We're not HR people. We never have been HR people. And HR people do not want to be associated with people like me. So take all this with a grain of salt there. The second would be that as far as formal requirements, HIPAA, all that, That's a level beyond what we're talking about. Third is we're talking about specifically really small to medium business organizations that have average requirement for policy and procedures. And then number 4, and this is a biggie, management needs to make decisions about how deep to take many of these procedures, just like any other P&P decision, because there is certain limitations or certain penalties that you can take from either a productivity or from a how empowering are you being in terms of your employees. Some companies are more comfortable, and we'll get into some of the specifics or specific examples there. Some companies are more comfortable than others, but if you don't make the decision, it's kind of a management by abdication, and we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the first things I've always talked about when I talk with companies is really what kind of company do you want to be when you grow up? Now, if I was a traditional cybersecurity presentation, I would be all doom and gloom, and all of these horrible things are waiting for you. All the bad guys are out there, and to be sure, these are true. The risk environment has never been so prolific, has never been so well documented and well seen, and the stakes are high, no question about it. That said, for every piece of technology, for every piece of procedure, for every piece of training you add, there is a cost for adding that next level. So do you want to be 90% secure, 99% secure, 99.9% secure, so on and so forth? So there's a self-assessment. And really, the danger zone, those are companies as far as, and this has to do with policy and procedures, as we'll see as we get through it. But the danger zone is, do you have official policies? Are employees allowed to do whatever they want to with their own equipment? Do employees know when they should or should not click on things? And if employees have trouble getting to a website, do they know why they should or should not be going to those things? This is very, very common about 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago for companies. In a lot of cases, it was because organizations would say we're too small. We're either too small in terms of we can't afford to have all of these controls in place, or we're too small as in the bad guys really don't want us because we're not a big enough fish. Both of those ways of hiding are no longer legit. Reasons for hiding are no longer legit. The bad guys have found ways to make the small businesses pay and make money for them, and the tools available to protect small businesses are a low enough price and have minimal interruption in terms of day-to-day productivity. So the halfway home, all right, policy exists, but not everybody is aware of it, and yeah, there's some limitations on devices, all that. You can read this stuff yourself as well. There are some inexpensive firewalls or tools in place. So in other words, we've done it, but who knows if we're fully bought into it. And then finally, the lockdown. Employees are well aware of security policy. Notice we're talking a lot about education. We're talking a lot about what your employees should know about what they can or can't do. The firewall is doing this job, the tools are doing this job, so on and so forth. So you might want to take a second and just say, where are we in those three? And it's not a hard and fast rule, or we are A, we're B. In a lot of cases, companies are, yeah, we're really locked down in terms of the technical pieces. We're really wide open as far as educating our employees. And this is especially true for companies who have either A, employees working remotely, whether it be remote sales force or anything along those lines, or they also have a lot of external actors such as consultants, vendors, customers who are actually accessing their internal networks. So the more open you get, the more important it is to have some of these things in place. Okay. So now let's get to the main topic, which is really what are policy and procedures. Again, I want to stress, what we've done is we work with a partner that's developed a full wide range of these policy and procedures and have made them available for us to work with companies. I'm a former CIO of a manufacturing company. It's also IT director of one of the medium-sized municipalities in Cleveland area, and I've worked with about 40 to 50 organizations on various levels and all of that kind of stuff through my life. This is really a good breakdown of potential policies. Not all will be appropriate for everybody. And in some cases, there may be some additional policies depending upon, again, your type of business and what kind of footprint you have in terms of, well, in some cases, your liability and the like. But this is a good start. So first of all, is there a written IT policy? Now, what's the goal of this policy? Number one, we want to ensure the security and confidentiality of sensitive company data. So data is a resource. It is a tool that we use in order to be able to present and develop our goods and services that we're either reselling or providing or whatever for our customers using other materials from our vendors and basically all of our stakeholders. And the data or the information that is either used or generated by these systems, there's a value there, and there's also a liability there. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that it's secure and that it's maintained confidential. And we also want to have reasonable protection. You're never going to get 100%. That whole idea, remember I was saying 90 versus 99 versus 99.9, where you get into that, how many nines do you want it to have? The cost for adding an order of magnitude is usually a factor of 10. So 99.9% clean is 10 times more expensive than 99%, 10 times less expensive than 99.99%. So, but we want to have a policy that's basically going to be protecting. And these are some of the things, and I'm not going to go through all of them. Some of the tools are some of the things that we want to do. So do we have people in place, security officers, security management? And this doesn't necessarily have to be, we're going, oh, great, we're going to create this big committee, we're going to create this, whole bureaucracy for a small company that's got like 50 employees. Not necessarily, but by the same token, if someone isn't in charge, it doesn't get done. So someone needs to be given the responsibility at your organization that's going to be dealing with this sort of stuff. So who has access to the information? Who are our third-party service providers? You remember Target? When Target got hit with their data breach, they weren't hacked. Their air conditioning, the company that provided and maintained the air conditioning for their corporate data headquarters, they were hacked. They had a link to Target's network. And since they were hacked, the bad guys were able to get into Target's network. Now, what Target did do wrong was that they didn't configure so that air conditioning network for those devices was was technically separate from their data center. That's bad on Target, but they weren't hacked. Which proves what? Which proves the bad guys are finding newer and newer ways to get to the places. So by knowing the third-party service providers, you have a better idea who's able to get in and the like. So facility access controls, who's able to get into your facility? What kind of training are we giving? How are we distributing the policies that we're making? Contingency. So, second policy, and yes, I told you we're going to go through these. Employee termination. Now, when we talk about termination of an employee, it's one thing to sit back and say, give us your keys. Okay, great. Got the keys. Why? How do we know that? Because we gave them the keys when they started. Now we get the keys back. Terrific. We should have that checklist. However, do we also know what kind of devices they had access to? Do we also know what their accounts were? And not only accounts in terms of logging onto the network, but do you use a third-party service like Salesforce? Is there a corporate UPS account? Is there a corporate Amazon account or the whatever? Or these, remember, the third-party services are the third-party services that we created and had to give these employees accounts. We need to keep track of those as well, and preferably in one spot. Now, there's another strategy called SSI, or single sign-on, where what you do is you can configure it so that the employee only logs on to one site, usually web-based, and they then have access to all of those services, and they never know what their passwords are. That technology is in pretty good shape, and it works pretty well, and it's finally, over the past 2 or 3 years, has come down in price, so it works pretty well for small, medium businesses. And what that means is that when a new employee starts, somebody has to create, and let's say it's 10 or so accounts for this employee, but that employee never sees those 10 passwords. They only see one password. So when the employee leaves, whether it's by his or her choice, all you have to do is change that one password. Yay, life is good. But in any case, so Do we have a checklist for what they have access to and the like? Do we have a procedure to assure the return of the materials? This is especially true for equipment and changing of credentials. And this is a big one. And this is one where even with our customers, and we work with about 80 to 90 companies, we still have trouble getting a consistent definition. What happens to their email? And what I mean is not just the historical stuff, but if John Smith, J. Smith at Simplex IT, or actually in our case it would be John at simplexit.com, leaves, what do we want to have happen to the email that's sent to John? And keep in mind, before you say, well, we don't care, if it's somebody who had, let's say, a business card was given to 3 years ago at a networking event, and today's the day that person finds that business card and go, I need to give that person a call. If you simply say that email goes away and disappears, you lose that business opportunity. Especially true the higher up or more externally facing the employees are. So absolutely in sales, in the case of your sales force, absolutely true, but also including in any of your officers, especially if that officer is quoted or their contact information is put out in anybody's press release or anything along those lines. So you want to make sure, and it doesn't cost anything to make arrangements for email to be sent, for email to be handled appropriately. You just need to have some kind of policy or procedure on how to do that moving forward. And in my opinion, it's best to just, here's our corporate standard, here's what we do for emails moving forward, and then deal with exceptions. Yeah, for this one we don't care because this was just a person working on the shop floor, was just used for internal communication. So we don't need to maintain that person's email address or the like. Okay. Security incident response. So if something happens, and this is becoming more and more critical depending upon the type of customers you have or suppliers, especially dealing with the automotive and or government, especially military. DOD, as well as what state you're working in, is if there is a breach, and a breach basically means that there was unauthorized access of, whether it be PII is your name, people's names, birth dates, any personal information that helps identify that person, customers, anything along those lines, or just sensitive company data. So somebody actually did have access to it. Somebody did get in. That's a breach. Unsecured means somebody could have. The door wasn't locked last night. Did anybody get in? We don't think so, but the door was unlocked. That would be an example of unsecured. Breach, look, somebody's been sleeping in my bed. Goldilocks. So do you have a process in terms of notification? And that really goes in a couple of ways. One is, do you have a process of notification internally? Meaning, if someone has discovered that was there, that this either happened or could have happened, how do they report it up that chain of command? You remember earlier I said, is somebody responsible for the security? Is it well defined that person should be identified or informed of whatever the event was? So, and then what do you do as far as media? What do you do as far as the people whose data was potentially compromised? And my suspicion is you're going to see some of you may already have requirements, again, based on your customer base and or the state that you're working in. But that's going to be getting more and more defined or more and more rigorous in terms of what you have to do. Again, it gets back to if it's your data that's compromised, if your information is out there, you'd want to know. So what happens? So we got a couple things that could happen. So, I'm sorry, from a sanction standpoint, if a person has caused that, what happens to that individual? What happens to that employee? So if a company accidentally, inadvertently release stuff that they shouldn't, or they access data that they shouldn't, that they didn't have a reason to access. Now, if the second issue happens, first of all, shame on whoever's maintaining and managing your network, as long as somebody has defined you should that this is the group that should have access to this particular pieces of data. Nobody else should. Well, simply by saying everybody else stay out of there, bad user, bad user. No. The network should be configured so that that person does not have the ability to access that data, period. Okay? And the employee just doesn't care. They're not doing their due diligence. We're talking about manufacturing companies here, so if you have an employee who is just leaving stuff all over the shop floor, who is paying no attention to cleaning up their tools or maintaining their tools, who just really they're not doing their job. The same thing would be true here. If they're not from an IT standpoint, if they're not protecting their data in an appropriate way. And then, of course, intentional release. So is there a policy, especially if you, and again, I hate to say this, stereotype is the salesperson. If a salesperson is looking to possibly go to either a competitor or someone else who would really love your customer list, is there stuff in place that says at least you're not supposed to do that? You're not supposed to share that data, let alone what is your product mix? What is the material that gives your unique value proposition, whether it be product or anything along those lines? Physical. I remember there was one time where I was meeting with CEO. This was several years ago. It was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And he was just going on and on about how secure they were and how important security was, and they did this, that, or the other thing. And then he excused himself and I think went to the restroom or the like. And while he was gone, his desk was littered with what was just very highly, no, I didn't rifle through it, I could tell, but extremely sensitive data. And this was the first time meeting with this guy. And yet he was giving a lot of concern to the technical network, but no concern to what was actually physically there. So where do we put monitors and keyboards? If you have people working on data that is considered to be private, do we then have that keyboard and monitor so anybody could see it? Are we using privacy screens? Are we using locking cables? Are we encrypting stored and transmitted data? And what I mean by that is that if you think about data, data is either at rest or in motion. It's at rest if it's stored. It's on your hard drive. It's in motion if it's being transmitted, whether it be transmitted because someone's using an application where the data is transmitted back and forth, or accessing a website, or sending an email that has contact or shared information. And either way, encryption, for all purposes, uses some level of coding, encryption, whatever, a cipher key, to make it so that inappropriate people cannot retrieve or manipulate safely that information. So if, for example, you are sending encrypted emails, a person who is just intercepting the traffic along the way cannot intercept that data traffic and say, I understand what's in that email. They would just see gibberish because it's encrypted. Similarly, if someone steals, borrows, whatever, someone's laptop, they're not able. And if you think because you have to log into the laptop, that's no guarantee, because all you have to do is pop the drive out and put it into another computer and it's readable. So encryption at rest would essentially mean laptop or server data is encrypted. Right now, the most popular use of encryption, unfortunately, is by the ransomware guys, where they encrypt the data and then hold it for ransom, not decrypting the data unless someone's paid a fee. So we want to basically say, from the physical network security, these devices are maintained, they're watched, we're keeping an eye on things. Access control. This is a biggie. We want people to be able to access, whether it be they're accessing equipment, they're accessing applications, they're accessing data, they're accessing a physical room, whatever. Employees, we want to be able to ensure that the appropriate parties, normally employees, but that the employees are able to access the appropriate equipment and the appropriate resources. So they're given an ID. Well, if they share that ID with the rest of the world, that's not very helpful. And then also, same thing, is it compromised? Also, use appropriately complex passwords. Boy, do we have a fight on our hands with this one. I can't tell you how many companies we've talked to where when we start talking with them about their IT and helping their IT support, where we find out that not only do passwords never change, but they also can be not totally non-complex because it's hard. And employees should keep their passwords secure. Those of you who may remember the scare that Hawaii had recently, where someone inadvertently tweeted essentially that there was a missile attack underway, it's easy for me to laugh because it's the only time I will ever laugh at the hardship that someone sitting here in Northeast Ohio, I'm going to laugh at the hardship of somebody in Hawaii. This is the only time and chance I get to do it, so I will do it. But I don't know if any of you saw it, but there was a picture that was shared of one of the staff members who was involved with that whole process. I don't think it was the individual himself. But what was funny was that behind him, on a Post-it note on the computer, was the password. So not only was it on a Post-it note, they didn't even put it under the keyboard. So it's in plain sight, and a picture that included that was used for PR purposes. So a lot of issues on that one. Passwords should be changed frequently. You disable the account after a number of failed attempts. I mean, yes, it makes it harder. Boo-hoo. You know, one of the other things that happens is that a lot of people use the same password no matter what they're logging on to. And one of the things that we've introduced, one of our services recently, is what's called dark web monitoring. When the bad guys compromise a site, and that compromise can be, whether it be Target or it be the adultery site, Ashley Madison, Equifax, any of these guys, the bad guys, the ones who got the data, they're not necessarily the ones who are going to use the data. No, it's like a burglar with a bunch of stuff they stole. They want to fence it. Where do they go? They go to the dark web. And we've done webinars on this before. You can see up on our YouTube channel more information on this. So we find out through monitoring the dark web that these people's credentials are for sale. And often a person will use the same password on several sites. So we had one company that when we went in and we said, hey, this is our report. Again, we were talking about bringing them on as a customer. Here's our report. Oh, look, here's your account, and here are the first 4 letters of the password. And the guy said, well, I don't know what site was compromised. And we said, we can't tell from the data that we're given. And he says, well, that's not going to help because I use that same password for every one of my sites. And I said, does that include banking? And he said, yeah, we've got about half a dozen banking accounts. So all these bad guys have to do is they will take that account and that password and go try various banking sites until they find one that works. And boom, they got in. So these are the things that we want to make sure that we've got good complex password. And we also want to make sure on the log off, locking, and encryption, we want to make it so that if I go to lunch, my computer isn't open for business, that anyone who wants to can just sit down in my office and just do whatever. So we want to make it so that if I don't do anything on my computer, it'll lock up. Well, that's inconvenient. You're right. It's supposed to be. But it's inconvenient for the bad guys as well as the good guys. With the good guys, it's a minor inconvenience. With the bad guys, it actually prevents them from doing things that they shouldn't be doing. This is where it gets fun. Computer use. What is a person allowed to do on a computer that is provided by the employer? Okay? So, absolutely, they're supposed to do their job, no problem. And we need to make it very, very clear to the employees that, hey, whatever you do on the computer, you have these restrictions, number one. But most importantly, at any point in time, We have access to any of your data. If it's on your computer, we have access to it. You have no privacy, no expectation of privacy, nothing. That needs to be at the absolute minimum clear. So again, story, we had a client who we don't believe in backing up workstations. We back up the server and we redirect all of the information that's normally stored on a workstation to the server. Much cheaper, much more effective, easier to manage, all that kind of fun stuff. But what we found was that a lot of users were basically backing up their iTunes libraries. Their pictures and their phones and all that. They were backing that up to their desktops, which was then being backed up to the servers, which was increasing, and they had plenty of space, but was increasing their total amount of storage on the server, yada, yada, yada. All we had to do was send out an email that basically said, hey, it's come to our attention, all these phones are being backed up, all of that. We want to make sure that you're all aware that the company has full rights and full access to anything that's on the computer. We have more support tickets later on, people asking us to make sure that data gets off the workstation. Because they didn't want that data, they didn't, there was nobody actually looking to go after it or the like, but we made it very clear that the data belonged to the company. But here's the other thing. What about non-business use? What if you have a person, an employee, who is, and it could even be during their lunch hour, going on Facebook, going on LinkedIn, going on wherever, and posting inflammatory or even totally inappropriate, doing inappropriate things? Is that a problem? So the question is how do you communicate to them? So that's one of the key things. And I've told, we're at 11:30, so I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. BYOD, same thing, but in reverse. In the case of BYOD, what is a person allowed to access in terms of company records that are using their own personal device? And keep in mind, getting back to the employee termination. The employee termination, how do you make sure that they've removed data from their personal device? The worst time to try to figure out what that policy should be is when you have an employee that you're worried about. On both cases. So you have these conversations ahead of time and you make sure you're doing what you need to do. Okay, equipment disposal is when you're getting rid of equipment, how do you destroy it? This is especially true for hard drives and the like. And then security plan, your facility security plan. Stuff should be locked away as far as servers and all that kind of thing, minimal access to it. You really need to provide security training for your employees. And one of the things that we want to do, or that we do, is we give actual full libraries of IT policy and procedures, which is about 42 pages. This is basically there's an offering that we have for doing that stuff. Basically, Bob at simplex-IT for more information. And again, here's our stuff that's coming up. And I apologize for having to run through the last few steps, but that's pretty much it. So are there any questions?
I have not seen any questions come in on the chat.
Nope, me neither. So, okay. Well, Ann, I'll turn it over to you, but thank you all very much for hopefully paying attention.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we hope to see you again next month on March 14th for information about cybersecurity, helping small businesses avoid threats and find cost-effective tools. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.